All right. Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Higgins, and I'm the program coordinator at the National Association of Federal Retirees, Ottawa. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the National Association of Federal Retirees, Ottawa branch office is located on traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. On behalf of the Ottawa branch, I am pleased to welcome you to today's webinar from Compassionate Ottawa entitled Into the Heart of the Matter, a workshop on grief and bereavement. We welcome our presenters, Marion Rattray, former registered nurse who spent the majority of her career at CHEO Hospital as a bedside nurse, manager, acting director, and acting chief nursing officer. Marion developed and provided leadership to the pediatric palliative care program at CHEO and Roger Nielsen House, and is also a facilitator at the Bereaved Families of Ottawa. Lise Beauchemin, a proud Franco-Ontarian, has worked in the field of early childhood education as an educator, trainer, and volunteer for most of her career. Lise has also worked as a coordinator of volunteer services at Roger Nielsen House, Pediatric Palliative Care Hospice, for more than 11 years. Veuillez noter que le webinaire sera présenté en anglais, mais la participation bilingue est toujours encouragée. I want to give a special welcome to anybody here who is not yet a member of the association. We hope these webinars will inspire you to join us, and to our members, we hope these webinars will encourage you to maintain your membership. I also would like to remind our members that our annual mega recruitment drive is in its final month. Until December 31st, every time you successfully recruit a new member, you will receive a ballot to win one of 14 great prizes, including the grand prize of $10,000 cash, courtesy of Johnson Insurance. All members who successfully recruit a new member will also receive a $5 gift card to Tim Hortons. To learn more, please visit the National Association website by clicking the link in the chat box. There will also be a question and answer period at the end of the webinar. Please type your questions in the chat box throughout the session, and they will be read out loud to our presenters. We are recording today's webinar, and after it is over, I will be sending you an email with instructions on how to access the recording and the presentation slides. I will also send you information on the mega recruitment drive and how to join the association or give the gift of membership. I am now going to turn the presentation over to Jenna with Compassionate Ottawa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erin. So hello, everyone. My name is Jenna Devaraja, and I am the program coordinator at Compassionate Ottawa. I thought before we begin, I just want to briefly introduce Compassionate Ottawa as an organization. Some of you may be familiar with us and some of you may not be. It's a little bit about us. So Compassionate Ottawa, we are a community movement that's looking really to change the way that we think about living well, especially in our last days of life, about grief and death. And the way that we are doing that is trying to encourage the community to become more knowledgeable about these more challenging topics and also become more comfortable talking about these issues so that in turn we can become more comfortable supporting one another in our last days and in serious health and serious illness. And we do this by undertaking a number of initiatives and projects, including supporting our school communities through grief, supporting our workplaces to become more compassionate, and offering workshops to our faith communities as well. And honestly, I could spend all day talking about all the work that Compassionate Ottawa does, but of course, I don't want to take too much time. But if you would like to learn more, I would encourage everyone to visit our website at compassionateottawa.ca to learn more about what we're working on. Now, before I turn it to Marion and Lise to start this wonderful workshop, I did very quickly want to go through the technical overview for today's workshop. So I'm just going to share quickly, run a few slides. So as we mentioned, this workshop will be interactive. So there will be opportunities for you to share your comments and questions and also participate in a small group discussion. So just a few things to learn how to use these interactive tools. So for example, you can use a chat box. So if you are in your computer, it'll be the speech bubble icon. So if you click on it, you should notice another box appear and you should be able to type in a message and direct it to everyone in the workshop. Now, if you are on your mobile device, just note that it'll look a little bit different. So you'll need to click the three buttons, which look like more. So once you do, a new screen will appear, a drop-down menu, and you can choose a chat function. And again, if you would like to raise your hand, there will be opportunities for a question period at the end. And so we encourage you to use the raised hand option. So to do so, you can click on the participant button, which will open up the participant list. And then at the bottom, you'll see a raise hand option. So you can click on that here, as you can see. And then again, if you're on your mobile device, again, you'll have to use the more button to see the drop down menu that looks like this. I did also want to mention that as I mentioned before, we will be using, we will be going into a small group exercise. And so when the time comes, you will be notified again, and you'll be brought automatically into your breakout rooms. And you'll have 6 minutes, I believe, for the small group exercises. Marion and Lise will explain quite a bit about this before you go in. And we do encourage everyone to turn on their cameras and videos while they are participating in the breakout rooms. Of course, if you do feel uncomfortable, you will have the option to leave and come back to the main session. So that is it for me. And I will now turn it to Marion and Lise to start our workshop.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today, taking the time and working with us on this topic. I just want to mention before I go on, Jenna gave her the Zoom function, but one thing it took me a while to learn is that when you do put something in the chat, you have to push enter for it to go out. I could never understand why that wasn't working. Why am I involved with Compassion at Ottawa? I grew up in a family where my mother lost her only child that was born to her. And she grieved that child for the rest of her life. And throughout my work in pediatrics, and I did do some adult work, I tended to be drawn to people that with progressive illness and approaching end of life. And when I completed my degree at the University of Dundee in Scotland, that was the focus of my education. I did my basic nursing education in a hospital setting. I'd like to really reinforce that I am not a counselor. The presentation here is developed from my experience and any research that I have done on my own. So Lise, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Marion. Well, hello, bonjour à tous. I'm honored and pleased to be here today. So I'm a volunteer with Compassionate Ottawa because I like to help people. I've learned a lot through palliative care, and we're hoping that with today's presentation, you will find it very helpful as well. So on to you, Marion.
So death is very much a part of life. And I find sometimes when I make the statement to people, you know, they'll say, well, how do you do what you do? I wanted to continue in this work. So hence I joined Compassionate Ottawa and Bereaved Families to continue to make that difference after I retired. And my response often is, well, you know, our death rate is 100%. And people seem to be taken back by that, but it's true, it is. And the other thing that comes to mind as well is in marriages and partnerships is those words that we do commit in when we take vows into marriage, till death do us part. And I don't think we totally absorb that. And this is very, very poignant for seniors as we move through life. I'm finding with myself that these things are going through my mind a great deal. In this workshop, we hope to deliver hope. When someone dies, it doesn't need to be the end of our joy. And we will go into that later. Just a bit of a warning is that all of the griefs and loss, all of our losses, not only pertaining to death, but all of our past losses are still within us. And in a workshop like this, you can get overwhelming feelings of sadness, and feelings of that grief can come back. So if that happens to you, feel free to just take a deep breath and turn off your camera for a bit and just get yourself collected. We're going to give you tools to help people through grief. When Monica Patton, our chairperson from Compassion at Ottawa, approached me about the workshop, initially it took a while for me to get off sort of the academic approach. But Monica said to me one day, what I want is to help people deal with Mrs. Smith when her husband dies next door, your neighbors, your friends, people around you. We will give you tools. And one important message to all of you and to anyone you're working for your work in the future is that everyone is unique in their grief. There is no right or wrong way. Thank you.
The objectives for our workshop today, what we'd like to help, or hopefully that you will take away from all of this, is to understand that grief is a normal part of life and how people cope with grief. We're also going to be looking at and hoping to understand the diversity and the complexity of the grief experience itself. Understand current grief and bereavement theory and practices, understand how to support people who are grieving, and become aware that there are grief and bereavement resources in the community for all of us to be able to access. So as you see, the workshop is divided into 4 sections: shining a light on grief, a journey without a map, reaching out, and then the question period. I encourage you, if you have a paper and pencil handy, to write down any of your questions, perhaps, if you don't want to put them in the chat, or even to sometimes, as it feels more interactive for you, to be jotting down notes or thoughts that you may have during the session. Marian?
So our first section will be shining a light on grief. And I don't need to read all of these to you, but this is just a highlight of what we were doing. And what we're delivering today, there's a lot of material in this workshop, but we could talk for 3 weeks on this nonstop. So we're going to give you simply an overview on the following topics. Next slide. So we are, sorry, we are a grieving population. Every time someone dies, research has demonstrated that with a death, there is a minimum of 5 people that are grieving that individual. And this, and of course, as we age, we are more likely to die. And these statistics are from research that show the number of people that are approaching senior and late seniorhood. So when you see the last one, the number of seniors aged 90 and over will increase from 132,000 to 427,000. And the fact remains, we are living longer. And when we live longer, we're going to lose people around us. I am noticing that already at the ripe age of 74. That in this past year during COVID, my husband and I lost 9 close relatives.
So there's some questions here in the slide. We're not asking you to answer these questions unless you feel free to do so in the chat. This is something to reflect upon. How many of you are comfortable with grief and bereavement? Do you know someone who is comfortable with this topic? Why are we so uncomfortable about death, with death? We live in a death-denying society. There's a big focus on youth, on growth, progress, the future. There's a discomfort with suffering. There's an avoidance of advanced care planning. Could it be that our Western society avoids talking or thinking about death as if doing so will prevent it from happening? As Marian stated earlier, 100%. So we have heard so many heart-wrenching stories during COVID-19. We got to witness how long-term facilities were ill-equipped and poorly designed for what happened during the pandemic. there are many people that during the pandemic lost loved ones, could not visit. It's no wonder we struggle emotionally and are uncomfortable. Most of us haven't been taught about death or mourning, how it affects us, or what to do. The pandemic has created an extremely difficult situation for the bereaved. We have to be aware of the psychological and emotional consequences on the mental health of those people. Already in normal circumstances, the bereaved feel isolated. So that has been amplified now. So maintaining physical distance with relatives and close friends amplifies social isolation. So to the next slide, how death is perceived across cultures. So for certain cultures, death is something that ends. The person no longer lives. In other cultures, other beliefs, the person transforms into something else, perhaps. These different conceptions have a noticeable influence on our lifestyles, on the readiness to die, the degree to which we can fear death, or expressions of grief and mourning. I have a short anecdote to share with you. I was raised in a family with Christian beliefs, and working in palliative care, I learned a great deal regarding different cultures, different religions, and different ways of thinking. It opened up a scope that I found extremely interesting. And a big part of it was having an open attitude to learn more, to ask questions, to show that I was interested. I remember coming into work and there was the nurses advised me that a little baby had just died. And we had gotten to know this family very well. In fact, this family was of Muslim religion, and they spoke French. So the day that I came in happened to be between Christmas and New Year's. There wasn't a lot of staff there, and there weren't a lot of other Francophone speaking staff, but I had grown to get to know this family a little bit. So I went to the room, knocked on the door, asked if I could enter because apparently Mom had been asking for me. The reason Mom was asking for me was that I learned that a mother can no longer touch her child physically after the child has died because the spirit has left the body. But Mom wanted someone to hold the baby. And she wanted me to hold the baby. What an honor, what a privilege. So I just asked her questions. How would you like me to pick her up? What side of my body would you like me to hold her? How would you like me to hold her? Do you want me to sing to her? Do you want me to talk to her? So I just kept asking questions so that Mom felt that she was the one and still was in control of offering that love and attention to her child. And we were waiting for the imam to come and get the child. I have to admit that after everything was over with, the adrenaline went through me. What an honor and a privilege. But I learned an awful lot just with that family. It doesn't mean that with every Muslim family, it would be the same thing. So with every family, with every death, it can be unique, it can be different. But I grew, and I also learned to respect and to try to understand how that family and that culture dealt with death. Marian?
So we'll talk a little bit about the terminology in grief and bereavement. I'll start off by saying again that death is a very normal part of life. At the time of a death, the word why becomes very important, going through our minds. It's the important word. Why did it happen to me? Why does it hurt so much? Some people may ask, how could the God that I've grown to love do this to me? I did everything I was supposed to do. I would hear this a lot from parents that had a child with anomalies not compatible with life. I did everything I was supposed to do. I ate what I was supposed to do. I didn't drink any alcohol. So why? Why did this happen? And every loss has a significant meaning for that person. And we grieve so differently. It depends on how we were attached to that person. And there's different levels of attachment to parents, children, grandparents. And I would have a grandparent. I also co-facilitated a grandparent group. And they would say, is it okay to say he was my favorite? So there was a deeper attachment to that particular child. Also, the cause of death. Suicide is very, very difficult. And I would say that grief from a suicide automatically becomes complicated. The culture of the family, and I'm not relating to religious practices or any of that. As Dr. Louise Colomb, who I worked with for many years, said, every family is a different culture, and you need to find out what that culture is. How they react to grieving. Some people are very demonstrative, others aren't. So the very demonstrative is much deeper into their emotion. The age of the person. When it's a child, it once again, complicated grief. But I do have to say, when my mother died at 96, and people would say to me, well, she lived a good long life. That stung. I was not ready to have her go, truly. The funeral rituals as well, what we do, as Lise mentioned, different cultures. And today with COVID, the fact that people, first of all, weren't able to say goodbye to their loved one, but also never even saw that deceased person. When I grew up in rural Quebec, in Eastern Townships, when an aunt or uncle, grandparents, anybody died, since my parents were on the family farm, that individual was waked in our parlor. And my sister and I would go upstairs to bed with the body down in the living room or the parlor. And visitation would go on for a day and a half or 2 days. Today, people don't even open a coffin. And I'm not saying that what is right or what is wrong. And often the next time they see their family, particularly if they didn't see them in hospital, a lot of people are now in an urn. So it makes it that much more difficult to accept. So our bereavement, the bereavement is that state of suffering, that time in our soul that hurts so much. And then people call us the bereaved, which we are. And the grieving is the internal emotions. Purpose of that is to lead us to accept the loss. And it's important to feel that pain so that eventually we can get on with life, rework our tapestry of life and move on. Next slide.
So mourning is a process, and we base ourselves on Warden's model. So as you will see throughout the workshop, there are different research and theorists who have worked many years on grief and bereavement. So the definition of mourning is the outer expression of grief, and it helps us make sense of the loss by retelling our story, by sharing and connecting with others through our shared experience. And so mourning is the process that helps people cope with grief. And it's expressed through rituals that reflect cultural and social norms. And it's when a person undertakes the tasks of grief. Now, there is no specific order for the tasks. They are numbered here. However, a person going and living through the tasks and working through the tasks could be working on two at the same time, or going back to one task that they had already gone through. So task number one is coming to terms with the reality of the loss. And this is when mourning is a natural and important process with a shape and a purpose. But we have to learn about how we will continue to live without this person and the reality. Many people will say, a couple of months later, I was driving down the road and I saw a farm, and for some reason, that's when I realized he's really gone. So you have to work with the grief instead of working against it. And it's in order to heal and to grow. Task number two is processing the pain of grief. So it's quite realistic that there will be pain. And there are secondary losses. For example, a change in relationships or in living situations, lost hopes or dreams. I think of my brother-in-law after my sister-in-law died. He said to us, "You got to live life, Lise." She died at 55, and we kept putting on the list of what we would do after we retired. Now she's not going to retire with me. All those trips we were going to take, things that we didn't do while she was alive. So those secondary losses, the changes, the loss of the dreams or the hopes. Task number three, adjusting to a world without that person that we've lost. Even relationships become very different. Again, my brother-in-law was repeated quite often. It was your sister-in-law that was the party goer. She was the one that organized all the social events. All our friends are couples. I don't have a lot of friends that are just my friends. And now they invite me out for supper, but I'm the man out because they're all still in couples. So you have to be gentle with yourself during this time of mourning and adjusting to a world without that person that they've lost. And task number four is establishing an enduring connection as you move forward on your life journey, because you will continue to live. So there are certain things that are going to happen, perhaps struggling not to cry in public, feeling bad for laughing or having fun. You are going to feel well. And there are different things that are going to happen, but it's going to be okay eventually. And you're not going to accept necessarily, but you will adjust. So it is moving through the grief that we heal, but that loss will always be there. Marion?
So grief journey is truly a journey without a map. And I think just following up on Lisa's comment about her brother and sister-in-law, brother-in-law, sister, how this is really hitting home with a lot of us seniors right now. There are things that we want to do in our lives as we're moving along that yardstick, but we're not able to. Trips we had planned, places we wanted to see. It's not happening. So that is another huge loss. And as we've repeated, grief is not just due to a death. It's due to so many other losses, financial loss, moving. This journey it involves a whole anatomy, emotional and psychological, the physical aspect of grief, which many people don't realize about what's happening to your body during this, the spiritual aspect and the social, very important aspect of our life. Next slide. So if you see the picture on the left, expectation versus, or on the right, expectation versus reality. We think, and we've been taught, okay, the person dies in a year after you get past your first, how many times have you heard this? It's going to be fine. And we have this perception that it's a straight line. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, is how it really is. It's like landing in another country without a map and without being able to speak the language. And besides that, being in a world where nobody understands why you're feeling, you're just surrounded by all of these moving people that are going on with their lives. There's ups and downs, there's movement forward, there's movement back. The important thing is there is no timeline here. And your grief is your grief, and how you walk that grief is it's your journey and what you need to do for you. Next slide. So what are some of the emotional reactions to grief? From my own experience, the people that I have lost, that I have been very attached to, it's that feeling of fear and anxiety. This gut feeling in your stomach, like you experienced so much as a child. And this feeling of helplessness, how will I ever go on? In my own personal life and in working with families that have experienced the death and are grieving, it's guilt. Myself, why didn't I leave the hospital sooner and get there before my mother died? I was leaving work. Why didn't I leave 10 minutes sooner? She died 10 minutes after I got there. Or why did I speak to her that way 15 years ago? Bring up past situations that are sort of haunting. There's also this feeling of yearning. I want them back. I want them back. I want them to be beside me. You can even fantasize about what it would be like for them to be with you. People will pray that they see their loved one in their dreams. As part of the grief journey, and the first while we are numb and in a denial, and that is our body's way to protect us from the incredible pain. So sometimes we can be flat and have an absence of emotion, and people might question why you're like that. The anger, it feels like a toddler that's had something taken away from them. You have this very regressive juvenile reaction in your soul. So emotions are where the thoughts reside. And we have to learn to realize that the thoughts that we have are what is creating the pain. And our minds are constantly going. And in the literature, and so many families would say, if only I could get rid of this incessant chatter in my head over and over again. So hence the journey. Next slide.
This is a list of the normal grief reactions, the psychological. And the list is quite long, as you can see, and it could probably be even longer depending on the person. You'll see shock and denial, as Marion mentioned, initially dazed, stunned, but it's nature's way of protecting one from the whole reality. It's a psychological shock absorber. There's anxiety, fear, panic, worry, Will I survive this? Will I be okay? Financial issues may also be of concern. There's envy, being envious of those who still have their husband, their spouse, their child, or people enjoying life. The next are the physical, the normal grief reactions that are physical. So according to Hans Selye's work, the physiology of grief is that when grieving, the body is under a high level of stress and is experiencing a hormonal imbalance. So the body, as per its normal function, is trying to adapt and trying to find equilibrium. So that's difficult. So there's cortisol that's released, which activates the nervous system. The body then tries to return to its normal state. The grieving person is under a fair bit of stress and probably doesn't even realize it. There are a lot of changes happening very quickly that alone can be overwhelming. So there's weight loss or weight gain, headaches, backaches, tightness in the chest or throat, weakness in the muscles. Some of these reactions, for anybody who has ever lived through a depression or a burnout, some of these symptoms are quite similar. So again, it's the hormones that are imbalanced in the body, and that is normal. Marian?
Spirituality part of our suffering and grief. The spiritual part of us is the part that searches for meaning in our lives, how we relate to the world. When someone dies, we look for solace. We look for answers in our spirituality. Once again, I mentioned earlier, why did this happen? God, why did you do this to me? I really like this quote, man is not destroyed by suffering. He is destroyed by suffering without meaning. In Viktor Frankl's book, he speaks a lot about the spiritual suffering and how he endured his life in the concentration camps. If any of you have not read that book, I suggest you do, not even for the purpose of grief and grieving, but for life in general. The name of the book is The Search for Meaning. When you're struggling spiritually, you want to reconnect because you've lost that connection, often with yourself, personal relationships. We want to get our soul back to where it was. Unfortunately, in the religious world, people that do have a religion, their anger is so great with their God that they will sometimes turn away from religion. And this is very sad because as a community, the church is often the place where people can find so much support. Next slide. So here are some of the symptoms of spiritual distress, very much like the other ones. But I think that feeling when you've lost touch with your soul and your spirituality, there's this incredible feeling of aloneness and hopelessness. This can create issues in families, with friends, and then it becomes secular. It reinforces that fear and anxiety. Really important to keep in mind that there are so many religions in the world, 10,500, and 34,000 different separate Christian faiths. In Canada, 67% identify as Christians and 24% do not identify with any religion. So people that don't identify with any religion can be known as atheists. And that does not mean that they do not have a spiritual side to them. They definitely do. It's just that they do not believe in any particular God. But they still have that search to find that balance inside again. So, and follow up to Lisa's comment around culture, only 67% identifies as Christian. So there is a large number of people that are from other faiths, and so important to keep that in mind. Next slide.
So the last section for the factors here are the social and situational factors. And your social connections are extremely important. But as we said earlier, we haven't learned, we weren't taught how to help people, or even for ourselves, how to deal with death and dying and mourning, bereavement. There is something known as the thirds. So you will see that friendships may divide into thirds. 1/3 of the friends are truly there for you, for the person that's grieving. Those friends desire to understand what you're going through. They will listen. They will be helpful. You will feel comfortable with these people. They may not exactly understand everything that you're going through, but they want to understand. They are willing to be involved in your pain and your suffering without feeling that they need to fix or take it away from you. You need to hold on to those friendships. 1/3 will turn out to be neutral in response to your grief. They will go on with their lives. They likely won't be the people that will be calling and checking in or bringing casseroles or offering to help with groceries or even plowing your driveway without asking after a snowfall. And they'll neither hinder or help you in your journey. They're neutral. And then there's 1/3 that will turn out to be harmful to you. You have to take care of yourself. And you will feel which ones are not being helpful. Stay away. Try to remove yourself from that 1/3. I was recently speaking with a girlfriend who's been a long time friend. And she announced to me, she says, I've got some sad news. Another lady we know has had a death in her family. Her son has died. And she said, when she spoke to me, she said, you know, you're the only one that listens. She says, all of my family keep telling me that I shouldn't feel so guilty, that I have to stop behaving like that. She says, I'm not even sure I want to spend Christmas with them. So this grieving mother already understood which friendship she needed, what 1/3 of the people that she knew she could speak with, someone that she knew would listen to her. And for that other person that knew that she could listen, that was so validating for her as well. She says, I know I can't fix her. I know I can't take her pain away, but I can listen. I can be there. I was very proud to hear about that woman already, that mother, knew about the people that she could get help from, and maybe some of the people she needed to stay away from, even for a little bit of time, while she's going through this very difficult and sad time in her life. So now we're going to the 3rd section of our workshop. As you may remember, we've got this workshop is divided into 4 sections. So now we're reaching out. And we're going to share with you tools on how you can feel more comfortable being the person that can be helpful to another grieving person. You're going to learn some of the best things to do to help a grieving person, how to listen, some techniques, and that we're there to support and listen, but we can't fix. So we're going to be looking at a video, and we're getting to our interactive session as well too, where soon we'll break out into small groups. And then we're going to look at resilience and timelines and a different perspective. So I'd like to introduce you to this video that we are all going to look at the same time, a video that can be found on YouTube. So I encourage you after the session and maybe at another time to look at the video a second or maybe even a third time. It's interesting what we see and what we notice when we view it more than once. But for now, if you want to take a paper and pencil and just jot down some of the things that you're noticing and seeing as you watch this video. It will demonstrate the difference between empathy and sympathy. Compassion is deeply and it is deep with empathy, accompanied by a desire to alleviate suffering. And you will also notice some techniques in active listening and body language, which will be helpful for the interactive part that we're going to have a little bit later on.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So part of showing that incredible empathy, number one is, as mentioned, is to feel it in yourself. And that's why when developing this workshop, we called it the heart of the matter, because it truly is the heart that is feeling intensely with that other person. I worked with Dr. Colomb, Louise Colomb, some of you probably know her, an incredible palliative care physician. And whenever we'd get a new consult, I would say, oh my goodness, Louise, because really nobody wants to see the palliative care people, particularly in a pediatric hospital. So what I would do before I would go into a room was to take a deep breath and say, dear God, please help me to be truly with this person. And Louise always had this thing called the owl technique. The observe, wait, and listen. And this observation is really important when you don't, I alluded to earlier, the culture of that family or the people that you're going to be talking to at the funeral parlor. How are they responding to this death? Also, in active listening, you're giving the other individual time to reflect and think before they respond. So I practice this in my nursing practice. Is when I would go to see someone, I would sit down and I would keep my eyes on that person. Have you ever gone to a doctor or been in a hospital when the nurse is standing with her hand on the doorknob, having to go somewhere else? Research has demonstrated that if that nurse comes in and sits down, the patient will think she's been there for 5 minutes. If she's got her hand on the doorknob, they think she's been there for 2 minutes when she's actually been there for 3. So very important. And present an attentive posture, sort of leaning into that person. And I think it's really important for us at that point to be sure we're breathing. Listen with our hearts. What are they actually saying? What is their facial expression saying? Let them lead the interaction. How many times, even in everyday conversations, somebody is willing to chip in with what they have to say before you even finished? You know they're not listening to you. Never discourage crying. It's therapeutic. In fact, research has demonstrated that in the analysis of tears, that cortisol that is floating around your body during grief is excreted in your tears. And that's why so often during something horrific, we feel better after that cry. Remember, your role here is not to fix or alleviate their suffering. Your role is to accompany and empathize and support through your heart. Wait without talking. I always say, if words don't add anything, don't speak. When someone does speak, when they do speak, wait 5 seconds before you reply. So now Lise and I are going to demonstrate what active listening is like. I am going to present with, and as we've mentioned all along, grief is not just about death. We don't experience grief just with death. It's also different issues, divorce. And I think I have friends that have gone through divorces later in life, and Lisa's the rule of thirds really comes out true. The people that are actually there for you and the ones that are not. The ones that will sit with you and listen instead of, and the ones that are trying to set you up with somebody else or move on. You're getting closer to the end of your life. So the scenario here is that my husband has just come home and he's told me that he's been offered a job in British Columbia. I have a job here in Ottawa. I have my sons and I have my grandchildren. And he would like to move away and he's pretty insistent. So hi, Lise, thanks for coming to see me.
Hi, Marian. It's a pleasure to be with you again today. You're looking a little bit distraught. What's going on?
Well, your visit today is really timely, Lise. Fred just came home and told me that he'd like to move. And so much of my life is here, my grandchildren, my sons, my work. But yet I realize this is really important to him. And I fear, and I just am so concerned. I'm concerned about our finances. When I give up my job, I know it costs more to live out there. I know I'm going to miss my grandchildren and watching them grow up. And I'll miss my work. And I'm too old to get another job. This is really hard, Lise. This is really hard.
I can see that it's hard. I don't have the words. Am I ever happy though that I'm so grateful that you're sharing this with me? You've really made a long list of your concerns. You can really verbalize it. Have you been able to share this with Fred?
To a point, but not too much, because he is so, this job is the dream of his lifetime. It truly is. And you know, I moved once before from the Eastern Townships in Quebec with a very young child. Gave up my job, gave up pretty much everything, gave up my car, moved in to have a house because housing was so much more expensive in Ottawa. And that was an awful time for me. I was pregnant. And I guess it's those memories that are creating such anxiety in me.
What would help you deal with some of this anxiety?
I guess if we were able to create a plan that I could work out those different aspects of my life and work out ways that I will still be able to see my grandchildren and my friends. I really appreciate you coming by today, Lise. Thank you.
You know, I'm here. You can call me. You can text me. I like to listen. And if I can help you with that list or that plan, because you're so good with social interactions, I'm sure you'll find a really good plan.
Thanks, Lise.
So now we're going to have the breakout activity.
I'm wondering before we go if there's any chats, anything in the chat about this interaction that people would like to comment on. Observations. I don't see any of these, so we can move on.
Okay.
So we're going to have a breakout exercise now, and we do not expect you to come up with a terrible story from your life. That's really hard to do with people that you don't know. And you can make up a story. That's fine too. And we just want you to just practice what it feels like to be an active listener and to also know what it feels like to be listened to. I felt very supported by Lise. I think too, her conversation helped me bring out some of my emotion. I was actually getting quite teary, even though this story is not true. So tell a brief story of a loss. The listener will listen attentively in silence, and you can use body language. And I know this is so hard on Zoom. It truly is. You can't feel the chemistry, and that's what's so important. And fortunately, I know Lise, so I was able to feel the chemistry inside. Then switch roles, and each person will take their turn to share and listen attentively. And on return, we'd like to know how it felt to listen in silence and to be listened to. Now, I think, Jenna, if I'm correct, that you're going to put people into groups and you will tell them when it's time to switch.
Yes.
3 minutes.
Yes, that is correct. So I've created the groups. You are in groups of 2, as Marion and Lise have mentioned. And you will be given 6 minutes. And at the 3-minute mark, I'll send a message to everyone to let you know that you can switch to the next person. And so you'll be automatically moved. In just a second here, I'm just going to adjust a few things. And if you are uncomfortable, you can